started with
so that
introduction to data stage. Yeah. So data stage is what I call is an ETL tool which will be used to perform ETL operations. ETL means what? Extract, transform, and load. Yeah. Meaning the extract is a one module or one layer which will be used to read the data from sources, and the sources could be homogeneous or heterogeneous sources. Remember, yeah? That's what extraction means. Yeah? So you will have the structured data, unstructured data, application-oriented data, and legacy data. These are the four broader types of data that we get from the sources. Yeah? So which means mostly out of these four, more than 90% of the cases we would be dealing with structured data, meaning the data that we get from the flat files or from relational tables. These are the most widely used type of sources. Plus, in some cases, we would be using the data from XML files. Yeah? So this is a third part. Yeah? Rest of them, like a data from mainframes, data from PDF documents, Word documents, data from SAP or PeopleSoft or Siebel. So that will be there, but less compared to what we use, like a flat files and relational tables. Yeah? So that's which means what? Extraction module or extraction layer should be designed or should have the capability to read the data from these type of sources data. Yeah? Now, once we could able to do that, the next step is what? What do we do with the data? That is a question mark. So that's where we need to think of applying a logic. That's where we call transformation. So transformation module or layer will be used in order to convert one form of data to another form of data is what we call transformation. Remember, yeah? For example, get me the sum of or total number of customers that we have under the category of, let us say, customer type prepaid. Yeah, how do you get that? So for that, we need to build mathematical expression in order to get there. So that such type of things would be done as part of transformation layer, right? And once you convert it, what do we do with the converted data? So that needs to be what we call sent to a target of what we call loading layer. So using this loading layer, what we could do here is we are going to take transformed data, which means converted data, and load that into what we call final target, which we call either staging, or it could be ODS, which is the operation data source, or it could be data mart, or it could be final target, which we call data warehouse. Remember, these are the different types of targets that we are going to use as a result of ETL. One, ODS. Second, what we call data mart. Third, data warehouse. And fourth is what we call simple temporary storage media. Yeah? So in simple terms, these are the three broader things of what we have when we talk about the output of ETL. So which means what? ODS, meaning what? Operational data source. Yeah? Which means, see, ETL means in one job, let us say when we perform some task, right? We cannot carry out all the operations that are required for a business. Yes or no? So all cannot be performed. So in order to take care of all the business requirements of what is needed for customers, so what we could do here is we need to what we call divide the simple requirement into multiple jobs, which we call n number of jobs, yeah, where first job will be used to take care of one type of operation, one type of task, and output of that store it into what we call ODS, which is operational data source. And again, this ODS output will be taken as input to what we call other job, which is going to be the second job. So likewise, what I call some other task, and then it could be some other ODS or it could be final target. Likewise, we can build n number of activities or n number of jobs where output of one job will be taken as input to another job. And so when we start building what we call n number of jobs, finally, let's say nth job, where we can take what we call, let's say, ODS and followed by some ops, operations, and finally it is, let's say, data warehouse. This is what happens in what we call in data warehousing industry, right? Now, let us start getting into other point. This is what we call ETL. So, data stage has been designed in order to perform ETL operations. So, to make it very simple, what do we do here? Read the data, apply logic, and load the data. That's it. To make it very simple, right? Now, once we understand this, next bullet point is what? We could also use this data stage to carry out data integration projects, which means what? Let us say we have the data from n number of sources. So assuming that there are n number of branches belong to one particular bank, let's say namely bank, and now branches are like we have B1, B2, B3 and B4. So what do we need to do? We need to know, like at the end of the business day or at the end of the business week, if the customer wants to know like how many number of newly added savings customer for this particular today's business. For that, what do we need to know? First, we need to find a way like how to read data from all these sources, which means what? Bank 1, Bank 2, Bank 3 and Bank 4. Which means what? Once you read the data from all the sources, which means what? N number of sources, right? Then apply what we call business logic. So which means what? We are going to apply business logic. Then load the data. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to integrate data from 4 sources and apply business logic, which is what? Total number of newly added customers, newly added savings customers for today's business. For that, or in order to meet that particular requirement, what do? We have to build a business logic over here. Once we are done with that, output of that will be loaded onto either staging layer or it could be a final target. To do that, again, we use what is called ETL tool, which we call Datastage. So Datastage is what is called capable of taking care of integration projects like building the data warehouse, which means what? Collect the data from n number of sources and then apply logic for all the sources and finally load the data to the final target, which we call the data warehouse. Plus, we can also use this data stage for carrying out migration projects, meaning what? Assuming that there is a legacy data, which is what? By using mainframe systems, yeah. So which means assuming that customers are maintaining the data by using legacy systems. If you look back 30 years back or 40 years back, the mainframe systems are popular than compared to what we have in current industry, right? So in current, we have what is called very good large databases with what is called very good lot of built-in parallelism, built-in many other what we call tasks which could be performed. So in such a case, if the customer would like to go with what we call migration of what? Legacy systems to latest systems, let us say, either it could be Teradata or it could be what we call something else. So how are we going to take care of this migration of this legacy system to newer system, which is going to be what we call Teradata database? To take care of that, what do we use? We are going to use again ETL tool, which is going to be a Datastage. Yeah? So this is what we done, what we call in Datastage. Yeah? So which means what do we do as part of migration? Basic goal of migration of what happens here is, because the type system of what we follow in legacy systems would be different from the type system of what we follow in newer systems. For example, if you take mainframes where you will have COBOL copybook or a structure which would contain simple types like an integer, float and so on, plus we would also have complex types like a vector, arrays or sub-records and so on. Yeah? But that would not be supported directly by using Teradata. So what do we need to do? We need to identify a way from which means what? Complex data types to be converted to simple types of what is being supported by Teradata. Likewise, there are many things. Even if we take, let us say, number, the number of what we use over here is different from what we use in Teradata. Similarly for other types as well. So in order to convert one what we call form of type to another form of type data, so we use what we call in between data stage. Yeah? So this is one of the second reason why we use what we call data stage. Yeah? So now the next is what these are the straightforward bullet points. So as we could see here, in any data warehouse architecture, if you look at simple ETL, right? To make it very simple, data warehouse architecture, we read it, apply logic, and we load it. That's it. That's what we do, right? But in order to read the data, let's say we have AAA and BBB and CCC, assuming that we are going to get the data from source systems like this. So how are we going to read if we get data like this? To read that, what we need to have here is, we need to have a repository, or we have to have metadata. Yeah? So what do we need here? So metadata is a place where we are going to store what we call structure or table definition or simple tags, which means what? In order to read the data of this particular kind, what do we need to have? First, we need to identify what we call metadata. Let's say column 1, which is of type, let's say string, column 2, which is of type, let's say string, column 3, which is of type, let's say string. So this is what we call metadata. But if you just define this, somewhere we need to store it, right? So that anybody can make use of this metadata in order to read the data of this particular kind. So that is where we use what is called metadata repository, or we can also say that simply repository. Yeah? So repository is a place where we are going to store metadata. Why do we need that? To read the what we call data. So to make it very simple, just to define metadata, it is data about data or data over data, or in simple terms, it is a simple structure which will be used to read the data that we get from source systems. So that's where a repository will be used for. So to do that, all these bullet points like creation of metadata, in case of any modification is needed, you can also modify the metadata. Plus, let us say in real projects, you will have three broader environments, namely development, testing, and production. Yes, sir. Now, whatever activities that you have done in the development need to be made available for other environments, like we have testing and production environment. To do that, we are going to use what? Export, which means what? All the dev activities can be exported onto the XML file or some other formatted file, and from other environment, let's say testing or production environment, we can get it imported. To do that, we are going to use export and import functionality of what we have in Datastage. Yeah? So in order to do all these metadata operations, we are going to use what we call a repository manager client, or we can also use designer client from Datastage 8.x versions onwards. Yeah? Once we are done with that, then we can start getting into what we call how are we going to build Datastage, what we call requirements, or how are we going to build Datastage jobs in order to meet what the business requirements. To do that, first we need to find a way like how to design Datastage jobs. Yeah? To design that, we have what I call one of the client or one of the utility or one of the tool within the Datastage which will be used to design like what is required for the business. Yeah? Once you design that, we need to find what we call an environment where we can start getting that particular job invoked or executed. That's what we call run. Yeah? So which means once you build a job successfully, we have a separate client or a tool through which we can execute that particular job. Yeah? So what is that client or a tool or interface? I'll talk about that as we go on. Yeah? Now, the next step is going to be what? Once we have this runtime environment, next step is what? In case, let us say, I want to run this particular job at a given date and time. In order to do that, we use what I call schedule feature, where we can schedule a job depending upon the date and time when you want to execute this particular Datastage job. Yeah? And then once you execute it, so we need to have an environment or the interface where we could monitor like what is going on for each and every job. For that we have monitoring interface wherein we can monitor each and every Datastage job, like how many rows that are being processed, how many rows are left over, how many and how much is the time that is going to take in order to process the rows of what we need to process. Yeah? And all those things will be done in one client which we call director client. I'll talk about that as we go on. Yeah? Now, the next bullet point is what? Administrator. Remember, we can have n number of developers, n number of production operators, n number of other stakeholders that can make use of this Datastage. Now, so we need to what we call control all types of users. In order to do that, we have one administrator client, yeah, through which we can control all the developers, which means what? Okay, this particular guy should have this kind of privileges and other guys should have this kind of privileges. All such things will be what we call taken care by using admin role of what we have in Datastage. Yeah? Now, the next is what we have one more type of job which we call this controller jobs or job sequence, where let us say assuming that independently you have built n number of jobs. Now, what do we need to do? We need to execute them in a sequential manner or in a parallel manner. So, as we discussed earlier, we can build n number of jobs where we can have n number of ODS or staging layers, right? But how are we going to run them, what is called together, which means what output of one particular job should become as input to another job. In order to do that, we have controller jobs or batch jobs, where we are going to make a call to n number of jobs and call them either in sequential or in parallel. In this particular example, what do we have? J1, J2 and J3. So what do we do here? So output of J1 would become as input to J2, and again output of J2 which will become as input to what? J3. So likewise we can call n number of jobs and output of n number of jobs what will be used to meet complete business requirement. That is where what I call this job sequence or batch job would come into picture. Clear? Batch job or controller job or job sequence or master controller, all are synonyms. Yeah? Please don't get confused with different terms of what we have in Datastage. Yeah? Now, the next is what this is a simple architecture of what we have in Datastage, where we could able to see what do we do as part of Datastage? Read the data and apply Datastage operations, it's a middle part, and then send the transform data to a target. That is a simple bullet point, which means what? Complete diagram has been organized in the form of what? ETL. Just remember. Now, the major part of Datastage is what? T, where we are going to spend a lot of time in order to understand what are the different what I call conversions or different activities where there is a need to apply business logic. So all that what is called we need to understand, and that's where we need to spend a lot of time in order to understand different features of what is being supported by this particular Datastage. Now let us get into what I call architecture part, where we have a client and then server and then meta or what is called data layer. Yeah? So broadly we have three layers, namely client layer and server layer, and third is what? Meta or data layer. Yeah? So this is a standard architecture that will be followed by most of the applications. So similarly, Datastage also is in compliance with that particular architecture, which we call three-tier architecture, or we can say simple client-server architecture. So this is a client, this is a server layer, to make it very simple. Yeah? So Datastage is a very simple thing if you think from what you call architecture perspective, but it is very complex as we go on with a lot of features that are being supported by Datastage. Yeah? Now, let us start understanding what is called what are the different clients of what we have in Datastage, and how the request that we get from Datastage would be serviced by using Datastage server, and under which platform we are going to execute this particular Datastage. Yeah? Those things we are going to discuss now at very high level, because it's architecture, right? Yeah. Anyway, we'll get into the details as we go on with what is called with a tool. Yeah. I'll just describe at very high level. The first and foremost client is what? Designer client, which will be used in order to design and develop Datastage jobs. Job means what? A set of tasks which will be used which will be interconnected in order to meet part of the business requirement. That is what we call job. Yeah? So where do we build that? This is where we are going to build it. Which one is this? Designer client. Yeah? Oh, there's a lot of echo. So let me try to what I call mute all of you and see whether still we have echo problem. Is it fine now? Echo and Joe, you can just type it if it is okay. Yeah? It's fine, right? So I request all of you to go on a mute so that there should not be any echo problem or there should not be any resound problem. Yeah? So or else you need to type your question. Yeah? So if you just take care of by yourself, then you can ask question at any time. Yeah? But anyway, now you'll have control because I made all of you as organizer. So you can unmute by yourself and start asking questions in case if you have any question in between or at the last. Yeah. Now we all know that what do we do by using what? Designer client. And next is what we have, director client, which will be used in order to run, schedule and monitor Datastage jobs. I repeat, director client will be used in order to run, schedule and monitor Datastage jobs. So like one of the bullet point which I was trying to talk over here, right? So this bullet point will be taken care by what? Director. And other bullet point which you could see here, which is what? All repository operations. Where do you do that? By using repository manager. So repository manager client will be used in order to create metadata, modify the metadata, export the metadata and import the metadata. So all such operations would be done by using what? Repository manager. Yeah? And other client is what? Administrator client. So there is one more bullet point which we have discussed in that particular slide, which is the previous slide, where we talked about what? Administrator client will be used to control different users, or we can also use admin client or Datastage administrator client in order to set the global properties, which means what? If I set one variable, that particular variable will can be used by different stakeholders of Datastage within a given project. So that would be done by using what? Datastage administrator client. Clear? So these are the what I call very high level bullet points for each and every client of what we have in Datastage. So all these clients are what? Graphical user interface clients. To make it short, GUI clients we call. Yeah. Apart from that, we also have what we call command line client, which means what? In case if you want to schedule Datastage jobs, or if you want to make the Datastage jobs to be invoked in automated way, how do you do that? Or in a scheduled manner, like what we discussed, right? Or in an automated way. For example, I want to run 10 jobs in one go. Yeah. So to do that, we can write a shell script where within a shell script we can call a command, which is a Datastage command, through which we can execute Datastage job. So we can have n number of jobs which can be executed within a shell script. That is where command line utilities we have within a Datastage through which we can execute Datastage jobs. So broadly we can say that we have what we call command line clients, plus we also have what? GUI clients, which we call graphical user interface clients. Yeah? And that's about what I call client part. Once we know like what each client does, next step is going to be what? Who is going to service the request of what is being sent from all these graphical user interface clients. That is where we need to think of getting into the next layer, which we call server tier or server layer, where that's the server will be used in order to service the request of what is being sent from all these clients. Those clients could be either command line or it could be graphical user interface clients. Yeah? Now, once we understand like what do we do as part of this, then this part also we all know. So repository is a place or it is a storage medium where we are going to use it to store the metadata. So metadata will be used in order to take care of reading the data that we get from n number of homogeneous or heterogeneous source systems, which are of different types like a structured, unstructured, application oriented and legacy, which I was trying to talk some time ago. Yeah? And underneath we could see what Windows or Unix server, meaning what, under which platforms this data stage can be invoked. To answer that, data stage would support Windows as well as Unix platforms, which means what? We can install data stage under Windows servers as well as Unix servers. But we can also install data stage on desktop applications also, like what we are trying to do in our training program. So what do we do here is we'll just install it in desktop so that we can use that for practicing. So yeah, for like whatever feature that we have in data stage. Underneath we also have one more what we call layer, which we call parallel execution. Remember, data stage is very powerful ETL tool in order to execute several tasks in parallel, which means what? Simultaneous running of several tasks would be accomplished quite easily by using what? Data stage. That is why the power of data stage would be what we call achieved in comparison with other ETL tools that we have in the universe. Yeah? So that is where data stage become popular just because of what we call the kind of parallelism techniques and the way we do the parallelism of what we have in data stage. That is why data stage has become more popular, versatile and flexible to use, not only just from the usability perspective but also from the parallelism perspective. Yeah? So these are what I call individual components of what we have in the data stage. Now we can talk about the flow of activities, like how the flow that is going to take place from this particular client to a server, then on to the engine, and how we are going to get the response to the client so that we could able to see the status of what we expect for a given request. To do that, assuming that designer or developer, they have built data stage job. Once they build it, then what do we need to do? We need to send a request from this particular client to what? A data stage server. So what data stage server does, it is going to what you call look at like what kind of request that I got it from designer client. So if it is a simple job request, the job request would be sent to data stage server, then output of that job request, which is what simple design request, which will be saved onto what we call repository. So repository is a place where we could store the metadata properties of what we configured within this designer. That's a simple request. And next request, once you do that, assuming that you want to invoke that particular request, that would be done either by using designer client or by using director client. Yeah? So both are the invocation tools. Assuming that what we call developer or production operator, they have executed that particular job, then what happens? This particular request would be sent to data stage server. Data stage server is going to delegate its request to who? What we call parallel engine, which is going to get executed in a parallel environment. So that is where what we call the request will be sent. This is a parallel engine. So parallel engine is the engine which will be used to execute this particular data stage request. Then all the way you will get a response back to the data stage server, and then on to designer or director, where we could able to see the status of that particular request. This is what we call runtime request. But the previous request of what we discussed was either compile request or save request. Remember, all the properties or all the metadata related things will be sent to what repository, but all runtime request that will be sent either from designer or from director or from command line. All of them will be sent to parallel engine where invocation of such jobs is going to take place. So which is what happens in data stage. Yeah. So broadly we have two types of request. One is what we call compile request or static request, and second is what we call runtime request. Yeah. So rest of the clients of what you could see here is what administrator and repository manager, where we are going to set the global properties here, which means what all those properties will be saved onto what a repository. Yeah. So which means again admin request would be sent to datastage server, then that particular request will be delegated to repository services, which in turn will be used to store the output of that particular property onto the repository. Yeah. So that's what happens. And similarly, we have what repository manager, which will be used to take care of all the repository operations like a create, manage, export, and import. So all such requests again would be sent to datastage server, and output of that will be stored onto the repository. So these are the what I call very high level requests that would be served by datastage server. Yeah. So broadly static requests will be taken care by repository, runtime requests will be taken care by parallel engine. Just remember that these two bullet points. Yeah. That's it. That's about what you call very high level, what you call overview of about data stage. Yeah. From next session onwards, what we do is we'll directly get into what you call logging on to one of the data stage client and start getting into the details of what is being supported by data stage with respect to tool perspective, and start understanding each and every feature with practical examples, so that we'll get into deeper insights to what we have in data stage. Yeah? So this is the starting point which will be used to log on to data stage client by supplying the host name, username and password and corresponding project. Once you supply all the credentials and host name properly, then we could get into what data stage client, which is what you could see as part of this particular screenshot. This is one of the client which we call data stage administrator. This is another client which we call data stage manager. This is another client which we call data stage designer. This is another client which we call data stage director. These are the different graphical user interface clients that we have seen, right? So these are the what we call e-screenshot. Yeah? One for administrator, first one. Second is for repository manager. Third is for director. Fourth is for what we call designer. So these are the four what we call broader graphical user interface clients of what we have in data stage. Yeah? So we also have one more client which we call admin console, which will be used to take care of creation of users, groups and roles, all that. But that I'll show it once we start Datastage 8.x versions. But prior versions of Datastage, which is pre 8.x versions of Datastage, where we could have only these four clients of what we could see so far, right? That's it. Once we know that, these are the what I call sequential steps that we are going to follow in order to build data stage jobs and get them executed. So first and foremost thing is what we are going to set global properties by using what this data stage. Yeah? Data stage administrator, which means what any change that you do in data stage administrator will have the lot of impact for all the jobs within a project for all the users. So we should be very, very careful while setting any property at global level, which means at admin client, yeah, which is data stage administrator client. Yeah. Another client which we discussed was with respect to repository, where we are going to use a repository manager client to take care of what or to perform any repository operations like we have create, manage, export and import. These are the four what we call metadata operations that we are going to carry out by using repository manager. Once you define the repository elements like a metadata structure, once you create that, then use designer client through which we can start building data stage jobs. Once you build it, we can compile, make sure that we are going to validate with respect to links, with respect to properties of what we configure for each data stage client, for each data stage stage we call. Yeah. Once you do that, then we can run and monitor by using director client. So these are the what we call sequential steps that we need to follow in order to build a data stage job and get it invoked and start looking at the results and status by using what? Data stage director. Yeah? So this is what we do in data stage. Once we know that, then we can get into what we call the different types of jobs of what we have in data stage. Like we can get started with what we call parallel jobs, which is a most widely used type of job, and other type of job which you could see here is what? Server jobs, which is almost obsolete because we don't have very good parallelism techniques within these server jobs. That is why, so we have around what we call IBM, they have got around 300 customers who are using what we call server jobs, but they have thousands of customers who are using what? Parallel jobs. So in our training program, we are going to focus on parallel jobs where we have a lot of features. Not only that, we have very good parallelism techniques within the data stage, mainly pipelining and partitioning. So we will talk about them in detail from next session onwards. If you have any questions, you can shoot out now, or else we can stop here. Questions? Any questions from anybody?
Yeah, I have a question. The question is about the installation. I know some people, they use other means to do it. So if they can give us some guideline in order to us to install it.
Yeah, so yes, there are some best practices or guidelines that we follow for each and every tool. So here also we have best practices and guidelines. I'll talk about them as we go on moving. Fine. Any other questions?
And do we have to get into that C++ and COBOL thingy?
Not really. It's not required. But internal data stage is going to make use of C++ compiler and C++ linker. So that is internal to data stage. But we just need to know like how to configure that, being a tool or user of this particular data stage.
Okay. Okay.
Fine. Any other questions? I'm just unmuting all of you. Fine. So we'll stop here. So we'll continue from here from tomorrow.